You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Hey, it's Bill Thomas. Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of Mind Over Murder. For the next few weeks, we're going to return to a series on the 2004 disappearance of Brianna Maitland, a 17-year-old young woman who disappeared in Vermont. Like the Colonial Parkway murders, this case is still unsolved. Her father, Bruce Maitland, together with representatives from PIs for the Missing, private investigators for the missing, and Chloe Cantor, a true crime podcaster who broadcasts under the name True Crime Twins with her sister, continue to cover the case and keep Brianna Maitland's memory alive. We hope you enjoy these bonus episodes of Mind Over Murder, and as always, thanks again for your support.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas. We're very excited to be starting a new series on the Brianna Maitland case with a two-part interview with her father, Bruce Maitland. We intend to explore this case on an in-depth basis and see if we can bring something new to the conversation about what happened to Brianna Maitland, who disappeared 16 years ago in northern Vermont. It's a very baffling case and an interesting case. This lovely 17-year-old girl disappeared and has never been heard from again. Many experts feel that this could be a solvable case with a fresh set of eyes and new attention, as well as the new testing that Othram is conducting.
So here is part one of our interview with Bruce Maitland, father of Brianna Maitland.
Joining us today is Bruce Maitland. He is the father of Brianna Maitland and also the founder of Private Investigations for the Missing. Very impressive guy, someone that we've been following for a number of years, and we're thrilled to have him here on Mind Over Murder. Bruce, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you too. Funny, I feel like I've gotten to know you a little bit better because I watched your discussion last evening on Crawl Space. They do a thing on Get Vocal where there's actually a visual component, and it was fun to listen to your observations and to be able to see you. I know in this example, we're just going to have to go audio only. If you would, Bruce, tell us the basic facts of Brianna's case for those listeners that might not be as familiar with the case.
The basic fact is Brianna was working part-time at a bed and breakfast establishment called the Black Lantern Inn up in Montgomery, Vermont, which is a little ski village that kind of sits at the foot of Jay Peak up in the northern Green Mountains. And she was working as a dishwasher at the time. On March 19th, which was a Friday night, after work was over, she was seen getting in her car in the parking lot and leaving the parking lot. And then about a mile away, on her way back from that place, her car was found backed into exactly the side of an abandoned building. You know, the car was backed up at a rate of speed enough to clear the foundation of the building and then actually looked like it got hung up on the building itself by the back bumper. And no one has seen or heard of Brianna ever since.
So the car, from the photographs, it's a kind of a big full-size Oldsmobile, mid-'80s type car, if I'm not mistaken. This isn't something that would happen as a result of an accident. This looks like somebody really made an effort to take that car and smack it into what looks like almost like a barn or something.
Yes, it was an old abandoned house that had been abandoned for many years, and there's no doubt that the car was actually driven past the house and then for some reason stopped on the road and was backed into that building. Yeah, the car was either something happened earlier that made another person back that car in there, maybe in an effort to hide the car temporarily or something like that, or Brianna herself may have backed the car in there thinking that she was trying to get out of some kind of emergency and maybe just didn't realize that the building was there, everything being dark. No one really knows for sure.
And weather conditions, it's March, it's Vermont. Was there snow on the ground, that kind of thing?
Yes, I think there was a dusting of snow on the ground, and there may have been some snow that night, freezing rain, that sort of thing.
But this is definitely not a traffic accident or anything close to that.
That's correct.
And
yes.
Are there any signs of violence or any sense of her being attacked or somehow taken away from the car?
I think there was a number of smaller items that were outside the car, and the doors were open in the car by the first passerby that saw it, and the lights were still on. So I take that as signs that something happened there. In my own mind, I think she was probably pulled out of that car at that point, some kind of struggle or something. There's no other explanation in my mind why there should be stuff scattered around the ground there.
So was this treated as a missing persons case at first? How was this classified?
There was unusual circumstances that they initially treated it as a missing persons case. However, they really treated it as a runaway case. The state police did for the first few days. There's just no real explanation for them treating that by the evidence that was there. It was, I think, just a presupposition on their part that, this is just a young girl. She probably ran away, blew it off right away initially.
And Brianna was living on her own at this point and working at the Black Lantern Inn and finishing up her GED. So the running away thing, it's not like she was living at home with her mom and dad at that point. I'm a little lost as to why the Vermont State Police would classify her as a runaway. What's she supposed to be running away from?
Exactly.
It's funny because a lot of times when you hear about a 17-year-old young person, quote, running away, they're usually running away from parental pressure or family issues and that sort of thing. And she wasn't living at this point with you and her mom, and she was striking out on her own, wouldn't you say?
Yes. Brianna, I've kind of described her as she was 17 going on 25. And she just was an incredibly just a free spirit and was just actually capable person. And she just up and decided that to put a little bit of clarity to just in a sense of a family history. I was at that time a back to the lander. If you remember that from the 70s. I just did it a number of years late.
Explain that for folks that might not be familiar with that movement.
It was just to live a very sustainable lifestyle. I was a consulting forester at the time. That's how I made my living. And I did some logging in the woods and different things like that. And we just got really interested in living that real sustainable lifestyle. And we had actually had an old farmstead in Vermont, and we took the next step. And I bought a large piece of land that was a mile in the woods, long driveway. We made our own power. We lived off the grid.
Wow, you guys were like trendsetters. Because this is very big. This is very big now. Again, here it is some years later.
Yes, it's had a little bit of a resurgence for sure. It's not quite as rugged as people might think. There's a lot of technology involved in it. And if you set up your place, you can live a pretty comfortable lifestyle, but it wasn't a very good lifestyle that Brianna was happy. I have some regrets about that. She didn't like it being in the woods, and she didn't like the solitude and being away from different friends. And it just all started with, we were right on the school line, and she wanted to go to another school and not the one she'd been attending. And she just made up her mind, I'm gonna live with this friend. And it worked through a couple of friends. There was a boyfriend there. She was with his family at one time. And I honestly did not like that, okay, and was against it. But there's really nothing you can do to stop someone at that age.
She's almost 18. And as you said, she's a very capable young woman who was determined to make her own way. So one quick question. How does one generate power in the woods? Kristin and I can see each other. We both looked at each other. Okay, so how do you generate power in the woods?
We had a solar bank, and then we also had a small stream outside the house, and we ran what was called a micro turbine. So it's basically generating electricity out of that water. And that charges a battery bank that you have. And then there's an object called an inverter, and that converts everything from a 12-volt system and your solar panels and your turbine into household electricity.
Got it.
No, it just requires you have to set your house up that way. Very low voltage type usage. We had propane as a backup and for heat when we weren't using a wood stove. And it just involves a lot of like minor changes that you set up to set your lifestyle up for that sort of a situation.
So you were doing the tiny house thing before they were even calling them tiny houses.
It was bigger than a tiny house, but it was still small.
Yeah.
Yes, probably about 900 square feet house.
When Brianna was living at home then, who else was there? It was yourself, your ex-wife?
Myself and my ex-wife.
And no other kids?
My son was there initially when we first lived there, but then he's 4 years older. And so he was actually living down closer where his work was, which was closer to Burlington at the time, the place. And then we had another house. There was another house on the property, and he eventually moved in there some too. So.
Right. But for two young people who were 17 and 21, give or take, at that time, the sustainable living in the woods lifestyle wasn't all that appealing to them.
Yes.
I think I get it, because when you're in your late teens or early 20s, I think it's a lot more about your friends and your social life and going out with your pals, those kind of things, than it would be living with mom and dad in a beautiful house in a mile down the road from civilization, to put it mildly.
Yeah, well, that's the age group I work with. You've got it spot on right there for sure. Bruce, at what point did the Vermont State Police actually, assuming it was a runaway case, and actually look at it as a missing persons case?
I think they got serious about it actually probably about 2 weeks in. Nobody had heard anything. We had an organization called the Class Kids Search Center contacted me, and they offered to help organize the search. And they were really good at me and promoting that sort of end and part of the organization factor. So at that point, it hit the media. And then it seemed like it all happened at the same time. It hit the media, and then they were really they got pretty serious about it at that point. And they had to, because there was a lot of pressure there on them.
And how was the media coverage helpful in terms of changing the circumstances of how Vermont State Police approached the case?
They just felt the media pressure. I think once the search came, it was like, this isn't a runaway. And they did a little bit of their own fact-finding at that point. I guess it just came together organically. It seemed like that portion of it happened all at the same time.
And had Brianna ever gone long periods of time without talking to you and her mom?
No. We would see her a couple of times a week, maybe more, maybe a little less, in a regular sense, sure.
For her to go 2 weeks without communicating with the rest of the family was extremely unusual. Am I correct?
Yes.
What was your impression then of the Vermont State Police investigation?
There was just a lot of kind of circumstances at that time. I was really so mad at him at that point. Things changed, but there was a lot of things that happened. My backstory is she disappeared on a Friday night. Now, the car was registered to her mom. And so the police found the car on a Saturday morning. For some reason, at this point, I've never had a good explanation of it, but he made the assumption, I was told later, this was a drunk driver. And the excuse was, we get them all the time. People they get drunk, they wreck their cars, and then they run away.
They're embarrassed and the whole thing. And I think I get that part. Friday night, car smacked into the old house.
Yeah, I get the point. Anyone that's kind of looked at that thing with any sense of, you'd think I'm just saying, from real quick, hearing the explanation, you've already picked up on the point that, hey, this is unusual. But anyhow, to make a long story short, the police found the paychecks. Brianna had left. Her paychecks were actually still in the car on the front seat.
I find that very odd as well. Yes. That always stuck out for me.
Yes. And so I guess he just made a phone call to the local towing service, and he had the car towed. I guess he snapped a few pictures and had the car towed. And then because it was a Saturday and his shift was done for the week, he never actually came back at the end of his shift and filed all the reports. And he never contacted us, even though the car was registered in our name.
We're both shaking our heads here. Not even a phone call to say, hey, we found your car. We wanted to make sure you were okay. In other words, I guess the assumption at the beginning was, okay, drunk driver smacked into the house going backwards at a high rate of speed. Although, as I said, even when you look at the photographs, it doesn't look like a traffic accident. Although I guess people have done lots of dumb things while drunk driving. What's odd then is, so are they letting days go by without even reaching out to the registered owner of the vehicle?
That's right. That's right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is not getting off to a good start, is it?
It just went downhill from there. She was staying with a girlfriend of hers, and the girlfriend, this is circumstance, the girlfriend happened to have been gone for the weekend also.
Oh, that's unfortunate, but that does
So the
happen.
girlfriend calls us at the beginning of the following week and says, hey, have you seen Brianna? Because Brianna left me a note that said she'd be home after work on that Friday night, and she's obviously never came home.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
So we start calling around Brianna's friends that we knew and trying to find out where. And at this point, you're concerned. But at this point, I have to admit, I didn't know anything about the car. I didn't know anything about where it was found. All we know that she didn't come home. So we still think her and her car are somewhere.
Are together. Oh, I get it.
Yeah. You know, when we found out that nobody knew where she was, we went down to the state police barracks and to put in a missing persons report. And then the officer that had the car towed was there, and he called us back into the office, and he pulled out a picture that he had taken before he had the car towed and said, "Is this your car?" And about that time, all hell broke loose.
Yeah, because all of a sudden now it's all coming together. Not only have we not heard from Brianna in what we're talking about, like 4 or 5 days now.
Yes.
And then he pulls out a picture, and you and your ex-wife say, "That's our car."
Yeah.
Oh, man. Wow.
So now I guess lights are starting to go on over everyone's head. I'm not criticizing anybody. Some of it, I think, is just the circumstances. So when you say all hell broke loose, what did they?
They told us what they knew had happened. He said, "I had the car towed," and it was like, where did you have it towed to? And then he told us, and it was just, we filed the report, and things are a little foggy for me there.
Oh,
some of this, okay.
Understood.
It's also because you're emotionally, you go into that point, you're going crazy. And I asked him, I think I remember asking during the point of it is, had he checked the car out? And I looked in the car, and did you look in the trunk? And he said, no, because I don't have any keys. And that's the first thing I did is I called my son, and we ran up to where the car was. And that was the first thing is we just pried open the trunk, because that was my fear that somehow she was in the trunk, because no one had ever looked. That was one of the hardest things in my life.
Yeah.
Of getting that trunk open and finding out that thank God she wasn't there.
And at some point, did they begin to secure the car and start taking a harder look at what's inside the car and begin to work the case from a forensic standpoint?
Yes, they had the car towed from that lot and down to the police barracks at that point. And then they started to actually do some kind of basic ground investigation. But there was just things that happened. I didn't wait for them at that point. My son and I, myself, we did what we could right then and there, because we weren't waiting for them. We went to the Black Lantern. We went to her friends. We went anywhere we could think of anybody that might know.
And you're also letting people know, look, she's definitely missing at this point. Some of these people might not even have realized that.
Exactly. And we started to put up posters and everything that goes with that. So that was just a terrible week.
Help us out with the geography a little bit. How far was your home from where Brianna was living and working at the Black Lantern? What's the distance? Just ballpark.
Ballpark, I would say 15 miles.
In terms of law enforcement for these small, beautiful rural towns in Vermont, there's no local law enforcement. Am I correct?
That's correct. That's all the local towns. The way that's set up is the state police monitor county-wise or multiple counties from each barracks. And that was 20 plus miles away was where the barracks was. And they have 2 counties that they monitor with a little tiny.
I'm not implying a criticism here. I actually live in a similar setup here in the northwest corner of Connecticut. We're in the rural corner of the state. They're covering a very broad geographic area from a single barracks.
That's correct.
How big was the staff? What was your sense? Did they have people that could begin working Brianna's disappearance right away?
Yeah, they didn't have any They didn't have any real investigators there, I think, on staff.
Wow.
That was probably directed from the main office at the time.
Which
So
is
the investigation was handled by the local lieutenant at the barracks.
Are any of the original investigators still on the case and actively looking into this?
No, none of the original investigators are on the case.
So in terms of actually moving the investigation forward and conducting forensic examination of the car and going back to where the car was originally found, which may have been a crime scene, who was doing that kind of work?
They assigned a sergeant who, I'm not sure whether she had any special investigating abilities, but they assigned a sergeant to the case. And then she reported back to the lieutenant. And so they went back to the scene over a period of, and there's where my time does start to get a little messed up in memory wise. They did go over the scene. They did bring dogs out to the scene, and they did start some basic investigations as far as they went back to the Black Lantern and just went through. And they went at us pretty hard too, particularly me. Yeah. So they did start to do something.
And that initial rush of energy and activity that you felt, were you able to continue pushing the investigation forward from a father-son perspective?
Yes. I'm self-employed, always have been for years and years. And so I essentially just shut work off and devoted my entire life to, in between the time I was doing my own investigation and then going down and meeting and expecting results and expecting things to be shared. And it just, quite frankly, those meetings degenerated into yelling and screaming matches.
Wow.
Yeah.
My family's been through some of this in the Colonial Parkway murders, and it's 34 years to the day today, on the day we're taping this program. So we have some sense of what you might have gone through. What were you expressing when things got to the place where you were yelling? What was causing you to make those observations? You were dissatisfied with the status of the investigation?
Oh, sure. For sure. And also they were upset with me for actually doing my own efforts to try to find her. At one point, he threatened to arrest me for interfering with the investigation.
Oh, I love this one. This is one of my favorites.
I basically told him, go ahead, because the minute I get done with this arrest, I'm going to go straight to the news media with it.
Yeah. Tell me.
I didn't get arrested, but things got about as far down as things could go.
What exactly were they going to arrest you for, Bruce? Being the father of a missing girl who was upset and concerned?
I don't know. I was talking to people that they didn't want me talking to, and I was stirring things up quite a bit.
Was the media helpful to you at that point? Were you able to use the media effectively to shine that spotlight on Brianna's case?
Yes, I actually think they were. And I got a little bit of a learning curve that I learned to use the media myself. And I found out they will respond to media pressure.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a very effective tool.
As a matter of fact, and I know you've worked with a number of families of other missing and murdered people through your private investigations for the missing organization, that's actually one of the things that I've coached people on, is using the media more effectively, because it can be incredibly helpful and important when you're trying to get the word out.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, your investigators' priorities and even their media approach might not necessarily line up with a family or a concerned father's point of view on a missing persons case.
But to treat the state police, in all fairness, now that was at the very beginning. That period of time culminated, and I had a fairly large meeting with some higher ups of the state police were there, and the barracks, the lieutenant was there, and the FBI was there. That descended into a yelling, screaming match and starting across the table and all that kind of stuff. I will say that was the low point, and they got rid of the lieutenant that was at the barracks, transferred him out, and they brought in another guy who was just a lot better guy. He really started and made an effort to work with the family, and he ramped things up, and things got a little better from that point. And just to knock it all off in a short amount of time, but he transferred out. Then they brought in a third investigator, or a third commander there at the barracks, and that guy was a man named Glenn Hall. Glenn and I, actually, at the beginning, things were a little rocky too with him and me, but I developed a really good working relationship with him, and he was very informative, and we just started to learn, or at least I did. We learned to work together. Fast forward to 2006, I had sent a letter to the commander of the state police at the time, and I just went through all the early complaints and a lot of the problems and issues. And I'd moved to New York State by then, and that commander responded. He came over along with his second in command and a few of the investigators, and we sat down at the table and we really hashed through that and the whole kind of all that had happened in the whole cases. And they came as close to an apology as they could ever come.
Yeah. Law enforcement's not big on ever saying they're sorry.
Yeah, it got as close as what I was going to get.
Yeah, they're very big on never saying they're sorry, never admitting a mistake, at least in my personal experience. I've actually had yelling matches with the FBI about this because I've said, how come you guys are completely incapable of saying you're sorry or that you made a mistake? I said, I do it every day in my personal life and in my business. Nobody would ever be able to go through life without ever admitting fault or ever apologizing, as near as I can tell, except for law enforcement.
The commander at that time was a man named James Baker. And after that meeting, we had another talk, and they've made some serious changes. He put two of his investigators on it essentially as their primary job to investigate this case and make sure it gets organized, because there was holes all the way through it. And one of my big complaints is that you have a lieutenant here, and now I get another guy, and he doesn't know what's going on, and he's got to get up to speed. And so they responded to a lot of my complaints, and they put these two guys on it, and they worked it pretty good for a year. And
which is a step in the right direction, it sounds.
Absolutely. And then he was replaced by a guy named Tom Lesperance, who I had a really good working relationship, and I could go to him directly. And as a matter of fact, he actually promoted that. He was the head of the Vermont State Police at the time, and we had fairly regular meetings and in-personal meetings, and we'd have breakfast and we'd talk about some things. And when I asked him and stuff that I said was important to me, he really tried to get done. And both of those guys are on the board of the private investigations for the mission.
Oh, actually. Wow. So, you ended up in a better place with some of the key players.
Absolutely. And they changed a lot of their formats. They instigate is not the word. They had no Amber Alert system.
Really?
They had no missing persons site. There was just so much of this stuff that kind of came about as the result of everything that they went through and I went through with Brianna. They really updated that. They actually changed their whole format of investigations. Now they have a major crimes unit. So now, no matter what happens in the state, their best people go out and work that major crime. They have a number of people, so they have a team that they put together to do that. And it was a way of working through these like rural areas where, heck, most of the time nothing happens. But when something does happen, it's not left up to the barracks commander anymore. There's just a lot of really good things, and I have a lot of good to say about them as the years have gone on.
Well, it sounds like they listened and learned, as did you, I'm sure, about how they could do it better. And Vermont's this beautiful place and it's this wonderful state. But as you said, every once in a while, something terrible happens and they've got to be able to address it. And it's funny, these changes that were made really do sound significant. Like the problems that you experienced in the early going of Brianna's investigation probably wouldn't happen in 2020 as they did in 2004.
Yes, I agree. I believe that entirely. And one of the things that came out it came out last night in the talking to the man from the DNA thing is the fact of the car. They changed that formula entirely. Now they no longer ever turn cars back to the families and say we're done with them. As long as it's an open case, they retain possession of things like that, cars or anything else, because of future DNA advancements that just weren't there and may be coming in the future even.
Yeah, we experienced the same thing in the Colonial Parkway murders. There's 4 double homicides, and except in my sister's case where the car was so badly compromised, in the other 3 examples, they returned the cars to the families, and the families didn't know what to do with them. And so ultimately, the families found it very upsetting to have the cars there, and so ultimately the cars were sold, often to just get rid of them. You mentioned private investigations for the missing. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization?
It was just an idea I had a private investigator that I started working with named Greg Overacker. And he came in probably 5 years after it all happened. And he's been with me ever since. And there's not enough good I can say about that man. Along the line, we actually discussed it, so I don't really claim to have the idea because it came out of Greg and me having talks. There's just people all over that need help. And in police cases, you learn through experience of this, but anybody's cases from a lot of people that I've talked to have the exact same formula. I mean, initially, there's what I call the reactive stage, where the case is fresh, the police work on it, and it's just universal throughout the country. It's a damn shame, but it is. They get called away by the latest fresh cases, and these other cases go to the background. So that reactive stage doesn't last very long. And then it just goes into a post stage where, they'll do a little bit. If they get something really hot, they'll do it. But they no longer actively go out and try to pursue leads and try to talk to people. And I found out through working with a private investigator that they have a lot of advantages in obtaining information over a police force because the people are much more willing to talk to them because they're not afraid they're getting arrested or anything else like that. So a good private investigator is a really valuable tool. And quite frankly, it went for years with me knowing that this was a good idea, but just not having them, not having the emotional capability to be able to handle that because it just brings back a lot of bad memories that I have to deal with. And I knew a lot of that just comes, and it even does some here talking to you. But it just came to a point where I said, we just got to do this. There's so much need out there. So I started the organization, and the goal of the organization is really pretty simple. We try to provide investigative services at no cost to families that their cases have completely stalled, gone cold, or quite frankly, were never really investigated to start with. Depends on and it's just been slowly building as we get funding. There's never enough funding. I would love to be able to go nationwide. I have 5 investigators we're working with now that kind of take this on. We try to pay what we can, but they're doing it in part as a mission themselves. We're actively working some cases and making some progress. And at some point, those cases still have to go back to whatever police force is the jurisdiction. They're the only ones that have the power of the state to be able to make arrests and do what they need to do. But as they say, the devil's in the details. Putting this thing together, you start with a really simple concept, but there sure is a lot to it.
Where can our listeners find some more information about this, or how can they help you if they want to help out? And our listeners do like to get involved. So what can we do to help?
The easiest way is investigatingforthemissing.org. And we have a GoFundMe page or a link where you can click on and make a donation for that. Any size donation is. And I have a whole team of volunteers that are really internet savvy. I'm told I'm on Twitter and all the stuff like that too. Facebook, I'm on some of that too that I don't know anything about. But there's a way to give through all those sites. It's very easy to give if you're inclined. And for anybody that's interested in giving, there's one thing that I stress is that we're not one of these nonprofits where we have a lot of overhead and we're giving very little to the actual cause. Every nickel they give, because everyone is a volunteer, goes toward these investigators to try to help families.
So essentially 0 overhead, and it's all going to help people in need.
Essentially, yes. We have some printing costs and just different things like that, but you bet. Everything's going, and that's the way it runs. And
how do families go about requesting your assistance? Is there a reach out method for that? How do we go about that?
For families, right now, it's been generally we're reacting. People will email us through the website and tell us their stories and want to know if we can help them. And obviously right now, we can't send an investigator out because developing an investigator in all areas of the country is difficult to do. And we also don't have enough funding right now to be able to pay a team of investigators from every state. But what we do is I work through Lance and Tim in the crawl space media, and what we try to give attention to the people in any way we can to help them out. And a lot of times, and the girls in the social media, tells you how to print flyers for yourself, and we also promote them through the social media. And Tim and Lance do a good job of getting a lot of the people on the show and try to get a little bit of media attention to their cases. And then we just sit down and give them advice. I do probably like you do, Bill. I've had families that have contacted and I've called them, and I've just from my own experiences to try to help them do a lot of little things to try to like motivate law enforcement, or sometimes it involves going and, getting records. And there's things sometimes that can be done, and the family steps up and does these little things if they know what to do.
Join us again next time as we continue our conversation with Bruce Maitland, discussing his organization, Private Investigations for the Missing, and next steps in the missing persons case of his 17-year-old daughter, Brianna Maitland. Thanks for listening.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.